we have quite a lot of participants from outside Britain. So welcome to you. And for your benefit, perhaps I should explain where Devon is. Not everyone will realise that Devon is a county in the southwest of England, sandwiched between Cornwall to the west and Somerset and Dorset to the east. We have two coasts, unique in Britain. We have the north coast and the south coast. And very importantly, we have two areas of moorland or upland heath that include Dartmoor and part of Exmoor that we share with Somerset. In addition to that, we have a long history of mining of various products that have left behind over the centuries some really good dragonfly sites, which are very important. What I'm going to do this morning is not go through one by one all the important dragonfly sites we've got in Devon. I don't think there would be time to do that because we have so many good ones. But what I do want to do is outline the meaning of priority sites and the process which I'm hoping others around the country will engage in. So without further ado, I'm going to go back actually to a talk I gave at this meeting 10 years ago and just ask these questions. Why do we bother collecting records of dragonflies? Well, that talk came in the wake of our second Dragonfly Atlas. And so clearly we had atlases in our mind, but also collecting records of phenology. So when dragonflies were on the wing, for example. We were looking forward, particularly at that time, to determining population trends from all the records that we've been gathering. We have indeed been able to succeed in doing that since then. But we could also identify and then monitor important dragonfly sites using the records that we collect. And these in turn will help guide our conservation priorities in terms of, for example, producing red list categories for species of conservation concern. And of course, I had to put that in. I don't think we'd be here today if we didn't think dragonflies were the best creatures on the planet. However, what I'm going to focus on today are these two elements: identifying and monitoring important sites and using those to help guide our conservation priorities. If I go back to the late 1980s, I think, we initiated the Key Sites project, and with it came the ability to record all aspects of dragonflies' life cycle. So not just the presence or absence of adults, but the numbers, the abundance of different life stages. And so down in the bottom left there, the abundance categories and the breeding categories, which have now been expanded to include willow emerald scars. But these were important components of the Key Sites project. And the obtaining this data enabled us to identify where species were breeding and in what sort of quantity. So you might remember, if you were here 10 years ago, you might remember this ladder. And I was pushing at the time the idea of producing complete lists as an aid to doing occupancy modeling and coming up with population trends. But you can see this ladder, if you like, is the way that recorders would be able to get more data as their skills increased. And right at the top of the ladder, which we aspired to getting as many people up to as possible, would require quite a bit of experience, the ability to identify individuals and to put time in to looking at sites systematically. And those we called priority sites at that time. So these came under the banner of Dragonfly Watch, which was our new recording strategy. And this is how various aspects of recording fitted into that strategy. Okay, so what is an important site? Well, we took advice from the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, JNCC, at the time. And the response we got, in essence, was it's got to be able to hold viable populations of rare species. So these were the most important in terms of conservation value. They could also hold a high diversity of species, so a wide range of breeding species, which it was admitted was less important from a national point of view, but locally these sites could be important. And of course, if you're interested in going out and watching dragonflies, then seeing lots of different species is a good thing to have. Most importantly, sites should meet robust criteria for selection. And as I said, we renamed them priority sites. So priority sites therefore needed more detailed records than we'd been gathering hitherto, or at least since before the Key Sites project. We needed counts or at least estimates of numbers. We needed breeding evidence. This was really quite important and was the trigger for my colleague Steve Cam putting a lot of effort into producing this guide, BDS guide, on how to identify larvae and exuviae. And that we sold at basically cost price as a means of trying to encourage people to look at exuviae in particular and get breeding evidence. So the priority sites criteria were developed against a series of thresholds. So rarity, breeding, and abundance criteria we came up with. And we thought, looking at records, realistically, looking at records over perhaps a decade, 10 years, maybe 5 years if you've got a lot of records, or possibly 20 years even, a 20-year period, if it was a remote site that didn't get visited very often. But basically, the more recent the records, the better it would be. So first of all, the question is, are there any nationally important species? And we define those basically as the red list species. Are there any locally important species? So things of a regional importance. And then are there breeding records of these species? So had we got good evidence that they were actually breeding there? And finally, do they meet abundance criteria? So was there enough of them to suggest that it was a viable population? So we did come up with actually an earlier version of this flow chart. I'm not going to go through this in detail. You can look at it on the BDS website and download it there and look at it carefully. But basically that puts into a series of thought processes, I guess, what I've just been talking about. So looking at recent records of important species. On the right-hand side, we've got the species diversity criteria, which are essentially the same. So do we have viable populations of those species that we can then add up and meet a diversity threshold, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the principal product, in my view, is down on the bottom left, the priority sites of national importance. So the nationally important species, the red list species, are currently these. We added nationally scarce small red damselfly into the list because it was borderline red listed or near threatened, and we gave it the benefit of the doubt as it's a localized habitat specialist. I should add that the red list is currently subject to review, and later this year we hope there will be a new list. Clearly we have had some changes since the first list was produced, and the recent analysis suggests that we have different priorities. Some species have done quite well and others have not done so well in recent years. Locally important species were defined as species of local significance, so they may be regarded at the county or vice county level as being of importance, and that there was an objective exercise carried out by our data officer at the time, Graham French, looking at the numbers of tetrads, or 2 kilometre by 2 kilometre squares in each county or vice county, to see how many records there had been in the last 20 years. There was a little bit of local discretion added, so where people felt that species merited local attention, they could be added. In Devon, those locally important species were defined as these 5: white-legged and red-eyed damselflies, hairy dragonfly, downy emerald, and then the very strangely quite rare in Devon, ruddy darter. The species diversity thresholds for locally important sites were set at the vice county level, as I've said, and these are the thresholds for the various counties in southern England, Wales, northern England, and Scotland. As you can see, the numbers go down the further north you go, reflecting the lower inherent species diversity there. And in both North and South Devon, our 2 vice counties here, 16 species was the threshold. So what is a breeding species? Well, successful breeding was defined as confirmed, i.e. an exuvia, which of course is the ultimate proof of breeding, and probable, which is ovipositing, a larva, or an emergent, a recently emerged adult. And these in combination would give us a confirmed priority site. Possible breeding, i.e. those copulating. So mating pairs are not evidence that there's going to be successful breeding, although it's quite likely. So we called these a probable priority site. And if a species has just been present with no evidence of breeding, then only a possible priority site, but one that would highlight the need for further visiting, perhaps. The abundance thresholds are a little bit complicated, but basically 20 or more damselflies and 6 or more dragonflies, but with a few exceptions, smaller numbers of scarce emerald, northern, and scarce blue-tailed damselfly, and then larger numbers of migrant hawker, four-spotted chaser, black-tailed skimmer, keeled skimmer, black darter, common darter, and ruddy darter, reflecting their general abundance, I think, in comparison with other dragonflies. So these are all available on the BDS website, I should stress. The products of priority sites would be, I think most importantly, the identification of potential or existing nationally important sites, which we regard to be of SSSI quality, so sites of special scientific interest that would attract legal protection. Or locally important sites would be analogous to local sites, county wildlife sites, they're called in some areas, or sites of nature conservation importance. So we had our comparisons with existing sites of general wildlife quality. We made sure that the relevant people were informed. So this could lead to better site protection and certainly better site management, we hope. And it could mean the start of monitoring of these important sites, perhaps using bespoke methodologies, whether that's counting adults or maybe collecting exuviae or dipping for larvae in some cases. And we could perhaps focus attention on the important species present at each site, although generally speaking, if you're at a site and the weather's nice and you're getting good data, then it would make sense to record all species. And this, in theory at least, and has to some extent happened in practice, would help with monitoring sites of special scientific interest and special areas of conservation, so sites of European as well as national importance. We have monitoring obligations nationally for these, and these are, of course, including some protected sites with significant dragonfly importance. So just to summarize that, dragonfly spot is very helpful for atlasing and phenology work. Complete lists where we record everything. We're out on a day visit. And priority sites which tick all three boxes: atlasing, producing trends, and site evaluation and monitoring. So really quite important things to try and focus on where we have people with the ability and the time. So back in 1995, on the right-hand side, we produced a hard copy of a key sites inventory that went out to a lot of people. You can see that lovely old British Dragonfly Society logo, bottom right, the four-spotted chaser. Some people will remember that. We repeated a 95 survey in 2005, 2006. They were consortium led. We were able to provide funding to employ surveyors. And we also encouraged our members and recorders to supply further records, additional records. And in fact, it was using that second survey data that enabled Graham French to refine the criteria. So we had several iterations of what would be good criteria to select for important sites. Graham came up with this map. So that's Devon, if you're not familiar with it. And these are the key sites that he identified, the confirmed key sites. I'm not expecting you to read those, but I will just point out that quite a lot of them were within Dartmoor, quite a few within the Bovey Basin clay pits, so old worked out clay pits mainly. The marshes at the head of the ex-estuary, and the East Devon pebblebed heaths. So these were four quite important areas, and we had scattered sites elsewhere in the county. We were able to report back to land managers a series of potential threats and opportunities, and these are some of the categories they included. So clearly, trying to maintain sites good for dragonflies was important. And we did throw a few ideas out in terms of maybe you might want to create a few new ponds or bring in some students to use for education purposes. The latest analysis that I've carried out over the last 12 months is basically assessing all of the records to the end of 2024. So I downloaded all the validated British Dragonfly Society records for this purpose. And I analysed 4 10-year periods. You'll notice the last one has 2 additional seasons left this year and next year to record. So part of the reason for doing this is that I want to encourage people to go out and look at the sites that perhaps need more data. But I had also got 87 to 96 and 97 to 06 done for the first 2 inventories. So it was a relatively simple job to do the rest. So this is the bottom line findings for those 4 decades of data. So at the top are our 5 nationally important species. We actually have gathered Norfolk hawker during the recent years and scarce chaser a little bit earlier. So the nationally important species has increased over time. And we have those 5 locally important species at the bottom. So just to give you an idea of the rough trends, most trends were upwards to some degree, but scarce blue-tailed damselfly and ruddy darter both went into decline for various reasons. But in the case of scarce blue-tailed damselfly, I think that may be a lack of systematic coverage of some moorland Dartmoor sites, which are more remote and difficult to access. So I looked through about 47,000 records, which was the total number for Devon over that period. There were, just out of interest, quite a lot of duplicate records, which does boost the total. I'm conscious that we have recently exceeded our 2 millionth record, but I do wonder how many of those are duplicates. And I guess that maybe 5% of the Devon ones are duplicated, coming in from different sources, not deliberately, of course. But also, I did go through, and despite the fact that all of these are supposedly validated records, I'm rather ashamed to say that I did discover a small percentage of doubtful records, which I've managed to extract and will deal with in due course, but also a very small number of definitely wrong records that have clearly been input incorrectly, I think. So this is just pasting a section of the Devon Records spreadsheet. So I used an Excel spreadsheet to extract the records. And I, first of all, hid all the fields, the columns that weren't going to be of any direct relevance to what I was doing. So I basically got species, date, site, and numbers of individuals. But what you can do with Excel is to use a filter to select, first of all, a species. So here I've selected southern damselfly. I could select a period of years, so a decade in this case. You can select the years you want to deal with. And then a site. So you can use the search facility to bring not just Prewley Moor down, but anything else with the name Prewley in it. So it's quite good for picking up sites with different names. Unfortunately, there are many misspellings in our database, so that's a rather confusing and annoying process, sometimes picking up sites that have got a slightly different name. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, we could select by life stage. So you could get the maximum number of adults by selecting adult, and then the number of ovipositing individuals, and so on. And what I then did is took those maximum abundance categories for each life stage and put them into a table like this. So I had a standard table. I'm not expecting you to read that. So here's a slightly enlarged version of it. But basically each site file has a standard format and with a heading that gives us the latest version of what sort of priority site it is. And then for each of the 4 decades, I've got successful, possible, breeding, and other, and then the maximum abundance category for each. And I've also then detailed records of the priority species. So having got a note of those, it's easy to go back and look at totals, for example, over time. A habitat description in the cases of the 1995 and 2005 surveys, where contractors were involved. We got very detailed habitat descriptions and maps, and then some other details about who owns the land and so on, how big the area is, and then identifying any possible threats and management suggestions. And then finally, a map or maps, diagrams of the site, in this case, Prewley Moor, aerial photo from Dartmoor National Park. So the results, it's most important, get disseminated to those who need to know. And so I will be converting my Word templates to a PDF file. These are going to go on the BDS website soon. I haven't quite finished the process, but we're only days away. And Ellie is very kindly going to put those up so that they're available for anybody and everybody to view and download if you wish, and make use of them, please. I will also be emailing the relevant files, or at least links to them perhaps, to Natural England and our local ecologists in the local authorities, landowners where I know them, land managers, ditto. Also to the local wildlife trust, RSPB, reserve wardens, country park rangers. I'm going to tell everybody the Worldwide by Dragonfly News and the Hawker e-magazine. And also I shall use social media to try and let people know what's going on and encourage people to fill in any gaps they can see by the end of next year, so that all of this data can be updated. So my conclusions from Devon are, interestingly, nearly all our dragonfly sites are artificial. So despite the fact that we've got some very nice semi-natural habitat in Devon, we still have a lot of them associated with, particularly with mining sites. We have had some losses and apparent declines, as I indicated earlier. I say apparent because, of course, the degree of coverage has a big impact on what data we can acquire. We've definitely had some colonization and spread by other species. I mentioned scarce chaser and Norfolk hawker as being two prime examples. I think an important point is that all of the sites that met the diversity criteria, i.e. were of local importance, also qualified under their species. So whether it was a nationally important or locally important species, we didn't add any additional sites purely by looking at diversity. So in many ways, I think that's a bit of a red herring, and that we should, in my view, be focusing attention very much on the sites for nationally or locally important species. Some threats can definitely be addressed by habitat management, and we can make a proactive approach to land managers to try and address that. And I stress this one, it's really important to engage and inform others. So be they land managers, landowners, or recorders, it's quite important to get these messages across that these sites are important. So for example, foisting the records onto the local record centre gave us quite a few new county wildlife sites on the basis of their dragonfly populations. We now have a robust method. I'm quite happy that it works well. We have, I think, we certainly tried to put across to the country agencies that our nationally important sites should be analogous to SSSI quality. We're probably not in the business of creating a lot of new ones, but certainly some of the old ones we can maybe confirm their quality. And then the locally important sites are analogous to local sites in the DEFRA sense. That's county wildlife sites and so on. Thank you very much for listening.